I got very inspired by them and decided that I would come up with a new story for this evening to get us all settled. So in the forest, there are many different kinds of trees. There are those trees that are sort of bent and gnarled like old people holding their branches out for balance. There are those trees that are very straight and tall with their branches extending symmetrically in all directions. And there are those trees that are very slender and graceful with their branches sweeping down toward the ground. Now there was this one tree who couldn't keep still. During the day, he was one of those trees that stood straight and tall with his branches out. But at night, when no one could see, he had to move. He loved pretending that he was one of those gnarly trees reaching out in all directions. Sometimes he stood up straight and stretched his branches up to the sky as high as he could. He liked to twist and bend and work out the knots. And some days he liked to imagine himself as slender and willowy and drape his branches down along the ground. Sometimes he just shook all over, turning his leaves up to the sky. He confined his movements to nighttime so that the woodcutter would not see him. He often heard whispers from the other trees. "Keep still! Stand up straight! Behave yourself!" He just couldn't help it. After many years of this control, he sort of relaxed a little bit, and sometimes his exercise and his dance lasted a little longer than it should have. Now, one early morning, as the dawn began to break, the birds started to chirp and whistle, and he found himself moving his branches and conducting. As the sounds grew, his movements became wilder to match the music. There was a flock of geese honking up above. He pointed to them. There were jays screaming over there. And all of the sounds were like a symphony. And he was the conductor. And suddenly he heard this percussive sound that should not have been there. And he realized it was the footfall of the woodcutter, who was not very light on his feet. And so he... Now the woodcutter came along the path. He was very familiar with this forest. He had been walking in this forest daily for many years. He knew every tree, every sapling, every shrub. He knew what needed to be cleared. He knew the first sign of disease. He knew which trees he had cleared around to give them space to grow big and tall. And yet, there before him was this tree that he didn't recognize. It should not have been there. And this is impossible, because trees don't spring up overnight, and trees don't change their shape. And so he thought maybe he wasn't actually where he thought that he was. So he turned, went back down the path a little ways, closed his eyes, turned around again, and came back. And nope, there it was. This couldn't be. It just couldn't be. Something had to be wrong with him, because what he was seeing was impossible. And there wasn't really, he didn't know what to do about this, but he did have work to do. He had cut a tree down the day before, and he had to get that wood off the ground. So he went further into the forest, and he went about his work, and doing that kind of physical work can free a lot of tension in your mind. So he kind of let go what had happened, and he worked the whole day, and what had happened that morning was just sort of, this vague uncomfortableness in his mind. So instead of going out of the forest the way he had come in, he went out a different way so that he wouldn't go there, because there was something uncomfortable there. Well, he got home, and he had dinner with his wife. And of course, he didn't mention what had happened, because what do you say? There was just no explanation for this. So he went to bed, had a nice sleep, and got up in the morning and went back into the forest to work. He had his axe, he had his saw, he had his lunch, he walked into the forest, had all but forgotten what he had seen there the day before. And when he got to that spot, there was a tree leaning slightly toward the east with its branches extended as if it was about to launch into a sun salutation, which was in fact what that tree had been planning to do when the woodcutter came. He stood there. This is really bizarre. I'm seeing something that I can't possibly be seeing, and yet I am seeing it. That tree is not that shape. Its branches don't do that. This is not that tree. He just didn't get it. And so he walked past it. He went into the forest. He worked all morning trying to figure out what was going on. And at lunchtime, he went back to that spot. He sat nearby, leaned up against another tree, and ate his lunch and stared at that tree, which was now exactly the way he had remembered it. And he watched it. He ate his lunch and he watched that tree. Of course, he didn't see anything. You know, you can watch a tree as long as you want. You're not going to see anything. So he finished his lunch, and he got up off the ground and picked up his axe and his saw, and he thought he saw some movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned and he looked. One of the tree's branches was nearly touching the ground. Had it been a moment ago? He wasn't really sure. Now he was really starting to doubt himself. He figured he was probably just seeing what he was looking for this now. So he turned to go, and he thought he saw another movement. He turned. The tree was still. And so he went home. He ate dinner. He was very quiet that evening. His wife was telling him about her experience at the market that day. Every day she would go into the market to sell kindling and eggs. And she was telling him about people she had seen that day who had bought eggs. And he noticed that she was rubbing her foot. And he looked at her shoes that were sitting there, and the leather, one of them was cracked. It was split. They were worn out. She had had those shoes for a long time, and he realized, oh, poor thing, I need to get her some new shoes. She walks quite a distance every day. So he went to bed that night, and he didn't sleep. He was having dreams of that tree. This tree that was moving, this tree that would not stay in the shape it was supposed to be in. And while the tree had not seemed menacing at all in his dream, it was lifting its roots up off the ground. It was reaching his branches out to scratch him and reach around him and grab him. And so he tossed and turned, and before dawn he decided that he wasn't going to go to sleep. He was going to get up, and he would go into the forest. So he got his axe and his saw, and he began to walk down the path, and he got to that place, and that tree was standing just as straight and tall as you please. Exactly the way he knew it should be. And he thought, I gotta cut that down today. I've got to cut that down because it's straight. I've been saving this tree because it's so straight that the wood will be very valuable. There's no knots, there's no burls, there's no twists in this thing. It's straight. I gotta cut it down today. And so he took his axe and began to chop at the trunk of the tree. The first chop just stung a little bit. The second one was really painful. And after that, it quickly became excruciating, and the tree blacked out and finally fell to the ground. So the woodcutter started cutting off the limbs. He cut it into pieces and then took each of them and leaned them up against the other trees so that they wouldn't be on the damp ground. It was a good day's work. And he went home. Now, as he was approaching the house, he saw his wife coming up the road, just coming back from the market. And he noticed that she was kind of limping. It looked like it was painful for her to walk. And he remembered how graceful she had been when they met, how young she had been. She had danced as a child. She had grown up in a very well-to-do family, but through some poor business decisions, they lost everything. And so her father married her to the woodcutter so that she would be taken care of. And he watched her coming, and he thought, oh, she really needs some new shoes. I'm going to do something about this. Now, on his back, he had some kindling he had gathered that day, and he also had 2 big chunks of that tree, because the wood really was clear and beautiful. And he wanted to make something out of it. He was going to sell most of it. It was very valuable, but these 2 chunks he kept, and he took them into his workshop. And after dinner, he went out to the workshop, And he stripped the bark off of one of them, and he thought, what can this become? A bowl. This would make a beautiful bowl. I'll make a bowl for my wife. So he took his knife, and he began to cut along the sides of this chunk of wood and turn it and cut and turn and cut, and it should have been nice and round, except that for some reason it wouldn't stay round. It kept elongating, like it was oval shaped, as if it were made of clay, and he was squeezing it. So he tried to hold it more tightly and cut as he turned it, and every time he would pause to look at it, it was still oval shaped. This was some weird wood. It just would not, it wouldn't behave. And so he threw it on the workbench, and he went in the house in frustration. Instead of going into the forest the next morning, he went right to his workshop, and he looked at this thing, and he thought, well, why not an oval-shaped bowl? That's a possibility. I'll let it be oval-shaped. Okay. So he started to chisel out the center, to hollow it out, and he turned and chiseled and turned and chiseled, and these wood chips flew out of it, and he turned and chiseled, and the hole wouldn't stay in the center of the bowl. It was at one end. It was like a piece of clay on a potter's wheel that kept getting off center. And no matter how he cut deeper and deeper, but the hole wasn't in the center. He couldn't understand this. He was good at this. He had done this a lot. So finally he thought, with clay, you have to let go of some of your control. And you have to hold it lightly and let the clay become what it's going to become. So he held the piece of wood really lightly in his hands, and he held his chisel in the other hand, and he just sort of lightly chiseled away at the sides. Over, you see. And he turned it, and he stopped thinking about what he was making. He just let this happen. And after a while, he had this nice, smooth, like a wooden shoe. It was hollow inside where he cut the hole, but it was like it didn't go straight down. It went this way, and it was pointy at one end. And he thought, this is ridiculous. He took his knife and he hacked at the top, made these scratches in it, and he went in the house. His wife had just come back from the market, and she was limping. And so he sat her down, and he knelt on the floor, and he took her shoes off, and he rubbed her feet and listened to her tell stories about what had happened at the market that day. And after dinner, he went back out to the workshop, and there was this damn wooden shoe. And he thought, you can't give a wooden shoe to a woman who walks forest paths and pebbly dirt roads. That's just not practical. It's not going to be comfortable. She's not going to like it. I got to make something else. So he took the other piece of wood. He really just wanted to make a bowl. But the same thing happened. It wouldn't stay round, and the hole wouldn't stay in the middle. And before he knew it, he had another wooden shoe. Now, the odd thing was, when he stopped and he looked at the first one, these hacks and scratches that he'd made in the top had sort of rearranged themselves into this really pretty pattern of leaves and branches. So he copied it onto the shoe, and then he had some red paint, so he stained it red, and he buffed them and made them shiny, and he thought, they're really cute, they're really pretty. And he said, they may not be the most practical shoes for my wife to wear, but the word practical and shoes don't belong in the same sentence when it comes to women's footwear. So I'm going to take them and I'm going to give them to her. Who knows what she'll say? He was a little nervous, but he went into the house, and he held them behind his back, and he told his wife to sit down, and he said, I made you something. I cut this tree, and the wood was acting really weird, and here's what I made. And he produced them from behind his back, and her face lit right up. She just loved the looks of them, and she said, wooden shoes for walking to the market? He said, I know, but try them on. So he slid them under her feet, and as soon as he did, the inside was so smooth and so warm, and it was almost pulsating, like they were massaging her feet. She jumped up out of the chair, and she did this little hop and this little dance, and it was amazing how comfortable and how light they felt. She started practically dancing around the kitchen. Like way she hadn't moved in years. She threw her arms around him and she said, I love these shoes. I can't wait to go to the market tomorrow. Well, they both went to sleep, and they both woke up really early. She was so excited about getting to market. She was up early. She made some lunch and had breakfast, and he helped her with the kindling. She had several big bundles of kindling tied to her back and a big basket of eggs, and she put those shoes on and she practically ran down the road to the market. She skipped and pirouetted and had the most wonderful time to get there. For at some point, she reached behind her and she pulled one of those sticks out of the bundle of kindling, and it began to twirl through her fingers. It was like magic, this wood. She twirled it, she marched, she skipped, she market, throwing it up in the air and catching it. She got there before she knew it, and when she got to her stall, she put out the kindling, and she just danced around that stall, and she got everybody's attention. The wood and the eggs were gone before lunchtime. And she was home early. This happened like every day. She in those shoes just skipped out of the market, and the woodcutter was back doing what he did, because the other trees knew to stand still and behave themselves. And so the woodcutter and his wife lived very happily, along with the shoes, which came from the tree that had finally been able to be what it actually was meant to be.